Hello everyone, it's Professor Lopez here once again, and we're going to be starting with Chapter 1 this week of our textbook, Principles of Environmental Science. Rather than giving you all the whole chapter right at the beginning, we're going to go ahead and break up Chapter 1 into two different videos so that way we can kind of stretch out Chapter 1 a little bit and then, kind of stretch out the assignments as well. So here we have an image of the textbook that you should be having. This is the 7th edition again. I know they're coming up with a new one, but if you have the 7th, you should be fine for this class. Now, like most books, you should have the learning outcomes for this chapter. Now, being that this is the first chapter, this is kind of like getting our feet wet for what to expect in this particular chapter. And so in this chapter, we'll see a lot of definitions as far as what is environmental science, some of the common problems that we encounter in environmental science, as well as some of the basic tools that we use in the field of science, particularly in critical thinking and in using the scientific method. Now, I like this great quote here that was given by Wangari Maathai, winner of the 2004 Nobel Peace Prize. He says, "Today we are faced with a challenge that calls for a shift in our thinking so that humanity stops threatening its life support system." And I think that something that is really important if you believe in the topic of environmental science is understanding the impact that we as human beings have on this planet, on this biosphere. I know there's a constant debate about whether or not global warming is a real thing. Me personally, as a scientist and somebody who frequently does read a lot of research articles on the topic, I do believe that global warming is a real thing. I believe that we are seeing some of the effects that have arisen because of the threat that we have posed to our planet. So I take those kind of issues pretty seriously. So, and especially in the political realm, we see constant bickering between the belief or non-belief of global warming. However, in this class, we're not going to try to politicize the belief of global warming, but kind of study at least what its effects might be. And so the first thing I like about this book that we've seen here is a real quick case study, and it has to do with saving the reefs of Apple Island. Apple Island is an island found in the Asian region, more particularly in the Philippines. And it kind of showed you a quick story that kind of tells you about the Apple Island itself and what happened to it. It was on the brink of disaster and pretty much on the brink of death. But due to some changes that were done in the lifestyle of the people in the region, they were able to bring back, this environment back into its better self. It was more habitable by the fish that populated the area. And not only that, but it also provided kind of a tourist boon to the island. So what ended up happening was back in 1979, there were some scientists who were kind of studying this area, and they had noticed that because of very rudimentary practices that were done by the people in the region, they were slowly but surely killing it. They were using things like explosive dynamite to pretty much kill large population of fish, at one time. And because of this, because of the residual mess that was left behind, the coral reef started to die. And the coral reef is very important. It's what helps to nurture the species in the area, the fish and other related organisms. So when the coral dies, the fish slowly die as well because they have to either move onward somewhere else, or they just die because there's no more nutrients in the region. And you gotta remember, coral are pretty much non-mobiles. They stay in their region. They don't have feet to just walk up and move onward. So what ended up happening was that due to the effects that were caused by these dangerous fishing methods, some scientists came up with a solution to hopefully protect other regions around the area, and that was to create somewhat of a protection zone in a specific area of shoreline. And by doing so, they were able to see positive effects in the region. There was an increase in population of fish as well as increase in coral reef. So they were able to set up sanctuaries, and they've been doing this across many islands in the Philippines. And so now, due to this case study, there's scientists saying that we should perform similar methods in other regions that have been threatened as well, because of course this is not just something that affects the Philippines, but affects many parts of the world. So this book, other than giving us case studies, it's going to help us to better understand what environmental science is as a subject. And we'll see here that in this chapter, it says here, you will learn about many serious environmental problems such as overfishing, and you will read also about promising, exciting solutions to many of these problems. And that's the good thing about this, is that yes, there are problems to our environment. However, there are many people, many scientists, many politicians who are working on solutions to help rectify these issues. But of course, number one is you have to understand the environment in which we live in. So the question is posed then, well, what is environmental science? Why do we study it? Why is it so important? Well, environmental science is the systematic study of our environment and our place in it. Now, this is going to involve the knowledge of many disciplines of science, whether it be biology, chemistry, earth science, geography, and even understanding things like economics and politics and social sciences. All this plays a relevant role in understanding what environmental science is. And then you have a really nice figure here that kind of breaks down the definition of each of these disciplines that will be necessary to solve a particular problem. So, for example, here in this image, the problem we have is a depleted fishery. All these fields that we see on this image are going to be very important to answer these problems. Okay. And we also have to realize that environmental science is a global subject. Now, obviously, we live here in America, and so we tend to be focused only on American issues. In particular, since we live in Texas, we tend to focus on Texas issues. But we have to realize that in some cases, some topics of environmental science are global. Things like global warming, again, is a global subject. So it's not just a local thing. Of course, there are some local problems that we can address. But there are going to be many cases that will see us looking at the Earth in general to see if we can solve problems. Now, this book here does have some Google Earth images that help us to see some of the places that are talked about in the book. I don't know if any of you have used Google Earth before, but it is a very interesting app that you can download to your computer, whether you use Mac or PC. And so I encourage you that as you read your book, anytime you see this Google Earth symbol on the margins of your book, go ahead and use your book to locate, or use Google Earth, to locate these places on your Google Earth app. And I think they help you kind of realize how real these places are. Now, of course, here we have an image of the Earth. Now, it says here that we live in an incredibly prolific and colorful world that is unique in the universe. And we have to understand that it is very unique because as of now, of course, we have not been able to find cases or signs of intelligent life elsewhere, mainly because we haven't found any planets that can provide the necessary nutrients or necessary atmosphere or climate to encourage the signs of life. And so because of that, we have to realize that we do live in a remarkable planet, and that's why we have to do our best to make sure that we take care of it. One of the things that helps us in this planet is that we live in relatively hospitable temperatures. Yes, we do complain here in Texas that it gets very, very hot. However, we can survive it and we can kind of acclimate to the environment. And in some cases, even parts up north where people complain that it's too cold, luckily we have the ability to adapt to that environment because it's not overly cold. Okay. And then the fact that the majority of our world is enveloped in bodies of water also plays a huge role in maintaining this awesome environment that we have. As your text says here, it says here, plentiful supplies of clean air, fresh water, and fertile soil are regenerated by biogeochemical cycles and biological communities. And so, again, you're going to see this constantly throughout your book as far as why do we need to focus on these environmental science topics. And that is because we have to realize that while, yes, our planet is remarkable, it can be greatly affected by man-made problems. And another thing that makes our Earth so unique is not only the place that we live in, but the things that inhabit this Earth. Other than human beings, which you have to realize that we as human beings are very complex, we are very unique, and we are very beautiful. There are tons and millions and millions of other species that inhabit this earth that are also beautiful in their own respect. And so we have to make sure that when we understand the science of the earth, we have to understand the science behind many of the species that inhabit it as well. And so one of the common issues that we see nowadays that has kind of created a problem for this earth is simply the abundance of people that we have on this earth. It says here, with over 7 billion people on Earth, we're adding about 80 million more each year. And of course, you have to consider this is referring to calculating the number of births to the number of deaths. And so overall, we have a plus 80 million result of people being born to people dying. And so we have an ever-increasing population that needs room to survive, needs resources to survive. And if we continue at this rate that we're in right now, scientists project that in about 30 years, which some of y'all will be maybe 40 or 50 years old, in about that time, we'll see about another billion people living on this earth, at least minimum. 8 billion to 10 billion people will be living on this earth. And as you can see right now, we're already kind of stretched to our limits. We're constantly looking for new things like fossil fuels and other resources. And so can you imagine with having another billion people more, at least on minimum, in this planet, we're going to be stretched thin for resources. And so obviously your slide says here that because of this, the impact of that many people on our natural resources and ecological systems strongly influences many of the other problems that we face on this earth. Now, as I mentioned before, this book is going to focus a lot on things that kind of pertain to climate change. As far as what is it, what causes it, and also what can we do to help kind of alleviate the problem. And so here we see an image that captures the heat on the Earth's surface. And you see that there is an abundant amount of heat that's being projected up on the north area of this Earth, which is particularly supposed to be cold. And that's not a good thing because, of course, the warmer it gets up in the Arctic poles, the quicker we're going to see the ice caps to melt. And, of course, when the ice caps melt, leads to a rise in ocean depth throughout the world, which then leads to loss of land in the other parts of the world. And so right now, what's been speculated is that the cause of this warming effect that's happening throughout the Earth is due to the increased concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that have occurred over the last 200 years. And you might be asking, well, what's happened over the last 200 years that caused the rise in greenhouse gases? And you got to remember, if you ever studied history, starting around the 1700s, is when we started the Industrial Revolution. We had the invention of steam engines and factories and things like that, where we had a lot of pollution all of a sudden kind of being thrown into the atmosphere. And so these last few hundred years, while we have gotten cleaner in producing products, we still do emit a lot of greenhouse gases over many parts of the world, especially other parts of the world where regulations might not be that strict, like in China. If you've ever seen an image of China, they have a huge amount of smog, dangerously so, where in some cases they have to be told not to leave their premises because the air quality is so bad. And so you see the effect that these greenhouse gases, these other carbon dioxide residues are having on this earth. Now, if the trends continue, we're going to see an increase in temperatures upwards of 2 to 6 degrees Celsius. And you might say, well, that doesn't seem like a lot, but of course here in American terms, that means it's a rise between 3.6 and 12.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can imagine that here in Texas during the summer, we complain when it reaches temperatures of about 110 degrees. Can you imagine how it'd feel if the average temperature all of a sudden rose up to about 122 to 123 degrees Fahrenheit? That'd be pretty hot. And I personally wouldn't like to live in that kind of environment. Now, of course, there's also a lot of problems other than environmental issues that plague this earth. Now, it says here, over the past century, global food production has increased faster than human population growth. However, even though that's the case, we still see hunger as being a huge chronic problem. And of course, the word chronic means that it's a long-term problem. And so, yes, here in America, we don't seem to suffer due to hunger issues. However, there are other places that don't have the availability that we have. And so, even though we have an increase in food production, there's still places that cannot feed their people. And we tend to find these places more in third world countries or war ravaged countries. Okay, and this is here that at least 60 million people face acute food shortages, due to weather, politics, or war, and especially due to politics, I think. But even other regions where you see that they might be affected by an earthquake, tsunami, other natural causes can lead to problems like hunger in the long term. And so what that means for us is that considering that we already have hunger problems, if we start to lose more resources, it's just going to lead to greater amounts of hunger. And another problem that we've also run into is even clean water. And it's not even third world problems anymore. We see this happening here in America. For example, if you look at the crisis in Flint, Michigan, you see that they're suffering from not having enough clean water. There's other places in Virginia where it was discovered that certain factories were dumping chemicals into the water, therefore causing undrinkable water, which is, you don't see it reported that much, but it is out there. Now, this is a very staggering figure, but it says here that 1.1 billion people lack access to safe drinking water. And we even see it somewhere close to us. If you ever been to Mexico, being that we're very close to the border, the people will tell you don't drink the water when you go there, and why. Sometimes it's said as a joke, but it is a true thing because not everybody has the regulation that we have here in the USA, where we have to make sure that we monitor how clean our water is and what's put into it. And this is another staggering figure here. It says every year, polluted water contributes to the death of more than 15 million people. That's a lot of people that are dying due to dirty water, and it can be dirty for various reasons. Whether it's just there could be microbial specimens in the water, or it could be sewage in the water, or garbage being dumped in the water. Various reasons that could occur that can lead to the dirtying of water. And it says here that 40% of the population live in countries where water demands now exceed supplies. And this is the places where we have population booms, places like India, places like China, where they have upwards of 1 billion people just in those kind of cramped regions. They are running out of water because there's simply not enough resources to feed the demand. And of course, we also have other problems that are more political and more than environmental, and that is energy resources. We see wars have been fought over energy resources, things like fossil fuels, which are oil, coal, and natural gas. We rely on them very heavily. It says here that presently, fossil fuels provide around 80% of the energy used in industrialized countries. So it goes to show you that we're still very, very dependent on old technologies. Fossil fuels have been around for a very long time. And so we're kind of depleting our Earth resources because we keep going to these same old resources. And that's why there is kind of a demand for newer technology, things like renewable energy, and making sure that we also are aware of things like energy conservation that can give us cleaner, less destructive options. We've seen here, if you go to Taft or other regions where you see these windmill farms, solar panel farms that are being produced throughout the USA and, of course, other parts of the world. These are the new solutions that are being brought up to hopefully eradicate our dependence on fossil fuels. Now, of course, being here that we're in Texas, a lot of people also depend on these fossil fuels for jobs. Some of y'all, of course, are very aware of the oil boom that occurred starting in 2010. It's kind of dwindled a bit, but it is on the rise again. And if you ever look at articles or videos of seeing the negative effects of these jobs, things like fracking, which are causing destruction of water and destruction of lands. These are problems that have to be solved in some way or another. But as long as there is a demand for energy resources, there's gonna be people that will kind of neglect the problems as long as they simply feed the bottom dollar. And of course, this book does touch upon those things. While it is a little bit touchy because nobody really likes to talk about oil jobs, it is something that needs to be brought to our attention. And of course, we also have to worry about things like air quality. I briefly mentioned earlier how places like China, where they don't have the regulations that we have here in America, their air quality is so bad, and it has led to deaths because people are breathing in toxins and pollutants. And so it's something that we also here in America have to take into consideration. If you go into large cities like Los Angeles and even Houston nearby here, and other large cities like that, you have smog problems due to large amounts of car pollution and other factory pollutions. And so, even recently, there was a statistic thrown out by Paul Crutzen, who estimated that at least 3 million people die each year from diseases triggered by air pollution. And that's a scary number. It might not seem like a lot, but that's a lot of people dying by a very avoidable issue. Okay. Now, worldwide, the United Nations, estimates that more than 2 billion metric tons of air pollutants are released each year. Majority are man-made. However, there are some that are made by natural causes. Things like when a volcano explodes, or even as silly as it sounds, a cow's fart. When a cow releases gas, it releases a lot of methane. And of course, one single cow may not produce enough methane to, cause problems. But when you have a herd of cows, particularly in India, where cows are sacred and not killed and not damaged, you have a lot of methane being released into the air, which then causes air pollution and air quality problems. So yes, the majority of our air quality issues are man-made. However, there are some that are more natural. And due to all these problems, we have a loss of a lot of biodiversity, whether it be through deforestation, polluting of our waters through garbage dumps, through factories dumping their waste into the water supplies. All this is causing a loss of biodiversity. And so that's a problem that's going to lead to extinction of many, whether it be exotic organisms or even just regular organisms. That's going to lead to huge, huge problems in the long term if we don't try to correct these problems soon. I know currently we've seen reports that state about that bees being put in endangered species. A lot of it has to do with, again, we're chopping down trees, flowers, we're kind of over industrializing certain areas. So by eliminating, the flower that they pollinate, we're kind of destroying their habitat, and therefore we're kind of dwindling the number of these species of bees and butterflies and birds and all these other types of organisms out there in this earth. Now, marine resources is also another big issue that is covered in this book, and this could be to a variety of issues. One is due to overfishing, especially places like in Japan, China, where there's a lot of people that will overfish even over the regulations. That's why certain fish like bluefin tuna, which is a delicacy in other parts of the Asian countries, it's almost out completely because of overfishing. Now, of course, a lot of it has to do as well as pollution of the waters. If you recall, there was an earthquake a few years ago, I believe in Japan, that caused a radioactive leak of some of their nuclear factories into the water. And so it caused the death of a lot of marine life. And so, all those things taken into account, they cause problems in the marine resources. Now, it's not all negative. There is some kind of light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to studying environmental science. There are some signs of progress that seem positive for the most part. Some of the examples are that pollution has been decreased, and this all has a lot to do with awareness. Even back in the 70s, you might ask your parents about this, but they started putting ads on TV, showing an Indian man crying, or a Native American man crying because his land had been kind of just tattered with garbage and trash. So even since the 60s, there's been somewhat of a movement to help kind of decrease the pollution, whether it's with trash or other waste in the atmosphere. So there is an awareness, and of course, population has also been stabilized in most industrialized countries. For example, here in America, most families have at least maximum 2 kids. When it used to be that most families back in the day, and you can even look at your grandparents and your parents for this example, they used to have upwards of 8, 9, 10 kids per family. And so because of that, we do have a somewhat more stabilized population increase. And that should kind of be a positive, because with a smaller amount of kids being born, we should not have to worry about having to get as many resources. You might have heard of the one child policy in China. You're only allowed to have one kid because of how much they're overpopulated right now. And there's also been a benefit or an increase in health. We started to become better educated in understanding some of the things that afflict the human condition. And so we've helped, because of that, we've helped eradicate a lot of, serious life-threatening diseases like smallpox and polio. For the most part, in most developed countries, that has been eradicated. However, there are still some traces of these diseases out in other third world countries. But for the most part, our life expectancy has doubled over time. Now, some of y'all might say, well, how did that progress? Because doesn't it mean that the longer a human survives, the longer they can be a detriment to this earth? Well, I mean, if you choose to think of it cynically, yes. But if you try to think of it optimistically, well, let's say that person has a better awareness of their environment, then they can hopefully, in their long life, be able to kind of have a positive effect on this earth. And as I mentioned before, one of the positives that we've seen is also the understanding and the creation of renewable energy. So we see encouraging progress being made. I see it a lot in a man that you've probably heard of before. He's the one in charge of Tesla Motors and SpaceX. His name is Elon Musk. And he's very, very big on renewable energy. And so we see a lot of people, a lot of big people in big places that are making concerted efforts to bring about renewable energy resources. And so we have growth in wind energy, solar, and biomass power, and improvements in efficiency are beginning to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. And of course, things that used to be really expensive, like solar power panels, have now gone down drastically, making it easier to develop solar wind farms and solar power farms and things like that. And then information and education has also increased. Just the fact that you're taking a class on environmental science should tell you how much we've increased the amount of education that's out there. And so because of things like the internet and Google and social media, we're able to see, an awareness that normally we wouldn't have before. And so we're also expanding education for everybody, not just here in America, but other third world countries as well. And that's good, because the more people know about these issues and the more they know about the solutions, the better off we are. And of course, we also have a greater amount of conservation that's going on. I know recently I've been reading on the news that President Obama has become known as the president who's created the most conservations, meaning that you cannot do any kind of negative damage to these areas, places like, that are very similar to the Grand Canyon and other forests. So the fact that we're preserving these places and not allowing them to be cut down or disturbed in any way is good, because it allows our environment to kind of breathe a little bit and kind of grow back to its natural state. And as I mentioned before, this kind of ties into a very early on slide in reference to Apple Island. We're also preserving our marine resources. We're creating these protected areas in California, Hawaii, New Zealand, and Great Britain, which makes it easier for our fish to thrive and coral reef to thrive as well. So we'll go ahead and stop right here for this chapter, and we'll continue with lessons 1.3 and 1.4 in the next video. Make sure to look in your assignments folder to see what assignments are going to be assigned for this current lecture that we just finished. And I wish you all the best of luck, and I will see you again soon.